In 1958, a classified Soviet military convoy disappeared into the Pamir Mountains with orders to capture something alive. Not a spy. Not a warlord. A creature the Kremlin believed could rewrite human evolution. They never found it. But what they left behind, buried in declassified archives 60 years later, proves that the world's most powerful government once believed the Yeti was real enough to hunt. This is not folklore. This is not campfire paranoia. This is the story of how a myth became a military operation, how science tried to kill a legend, and how the monster we feared most turned out to be something far more disturbing than teeth and fur. Because the Yeti did exist. Just not the way anyone thought. Let's start with the paperwork. December 1957. Moscow. The Presidium of the Academy of Sciences of the USSR, the most elite scientific body in the Soviet Union, convenes an emergency session. The topic is not nuclear physics, not the space race. The agenda reads, investigation into reports of relict hominids in the highlands of Central Asia. Relict hominid. That's the polite term. What they're actually discussing is whether a species of primitive human, or something close enough, has survived undetected in the mountains between Afghanistan, Tibet, and the Soviet Republic. The chairman of the commission is a man named Boris Porshnev, a respected historian and anthropologist. Sitting beside him, zoologists, military intelligence officers, alpine specialists, and a representative from the Ministry of Defense. The meeting is not public. The minutes will remain classified for decades. But the conclusion is unanimous. An expedition will be authorized. State-funded, supported. Official. Why? Because if the Yeti is real, it's not just a curiosity. It's a weapon. Not a literal weapon. An ideological one. The Soviet Union in the 1950s is locked in a global contest with the West, and part of that war is philosophical. The Communist Party has spent decades promoting dialectical materialism, a worldview that rejects religion and embraces Darwin. If Soviet scientists can prove the existence of a missing link, a creature halfway between ape and human, it would be a propaganda coup. It would validate evolutionary theory in the most dramatic way imaginable. It would humiliate the Church. And it would prove, once again, that Soviet science leads the world. So in the spring of 1958, the first official Yeti expedition sets out. Not amateurs. Not thrill-seekers. Career scientists with government credentials and military escorts. They carry plaster molds for footprints, cameras, tranquilizer guns. They interview hundreds of locals, herders, porters, village elders, and the reports are maddeningly consistent. A creature, bipedal, covered in reddish-brown hair, taller than a man, shoulders like a bear, face like something caught between human and animal. It moves at night. It avoids fire. It smells like rot and musk. Some say it steals livestock. Others say it watches camps from the ridgeline and vanishes at dawn. The Soviets catalog it all. They document tracks in the snow, massive, five-toed, eerily human. They collect hair samples from tree bark. They photograph dung that doesn't match any known species in the region. And they find nothing conclusive. No body. No bones. No confirmed sighting by a scientist. Just stories. Just traces. Just the maddening sense that something is out there, just beyond the edge of the searchlight. The program continues for 3 more years. Then, quietly, it's shut down. No public announcement. No official report. The files are sealed. Decades later, when researchers finally access the archives, they find thousands of pages of witness testimony, maps, and field note. But no proof. The Soviet Union, a superpower willing to spend billions on the space race, gave up on the Yeti. But the question remains, why did they take it seriously in the first place? Because the human brain is a pattern recognition machine, and in extreme environments, that machine starts to malfunction. Here's what happens when you spend weeks at high altitude, in sub-zero temperatures, with thin oxygen and little sleep. Your brain begins to starve. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, subtly, the neurons start misfiring. You see movement in static shadows. You hear footsteps in the wind. You wake up convinced someone is standing at the edge of your tent, only to find nothing but snow and darkness. This is not weakness. This is biology. The phenomenon is called pareidolia when it's visual, the brain's tendency to impose familiar patterns on random stimuli. It's why we see faces in clouds, in burnt toast, in the grain of wood. In the mountains, pareidolia becomes hyperactive. A distant boulder becomes a crouching figure. A rock formation becomes a hunched silhouette. And if you're already primed to expect a Yeti, if every local you've spoken to has warned you about the wild man of the peaks, your brain will oblige. It will show you exactly what you're afraid of. Then there's group contagion. When one person in an isolated group reports seeing something, the probability that others will see it too skyrockets. Not because they're lying. Because expectation is contagious. The first sighting seeds the idea. The second person, now primed, interprets ambiguous stimuli through that lens. The third person doesn't want to be left out, doesn't want to seem oblivious. By the fourth witness, the story has calcified into shared reality. Add altitude sickness. Add exhaustion. Add the psychological weight of being in a landscape that feels hostile and ancient, where every sound echoes and every shadow seems alive. Now add cultural context. You're in a region where stories of the Yeti aren't fringe. They're woven into local cosmology. Monks speak of it. Elders describe it. Children are warned about it. You're not arriving as a blank slate. You're arriving preloaded with a narrative. And the mind, under stress, will complete the narrative. This is why Yeti sightings cluster. Not because the creature migrate. Because the idea migrate. Expeditions hear the local stories, venture into the same valleys, experience the same environmental stressors, and report the same thing. The consistency isn't proof of a creature. It's proof of how reliably human perception breaks under strain. But here's the uncomfortable part. This explanation, while true, doesn't feel satisfying. Because it dismisses the witnesses. It reduces their experience to hallucination, to error, to weakness. And some of those witnesses are credible. Experienced mountaineers, military personnel, scientists, people who are trained to observe, trained to stay calm. So when those people say they saw something, we're left with a choice. Either they're all mistaken, or something else is happening. Which brings us to Nepal, to a monastery, and to a severed hand. For decades, the Pangbosh Monastery in the Kumbh region of Nepal housed what monks claimed was the mummified hand of a Yeti. It was kept in a locked shrine, shown only to pilgrims and the occasional daring Westerner willing to make the trek. The hand was large, leathery, with elongated fingers and what appeared to be coarse black hair still clinging to the dried skin. It didn't look human. It didn't look like any known primate. In 1959, a wealthy American oil heir and cryptozoology enthusiast named Tom Slick decided he wanted it. Not to worship, to test. Slick had funded multiple Yeti expeditions, and he believed this relic could be the smoking gun. But the monks refused to part with it. It was sacred. It was proof of the spiritual world's mysteries. It was not for sale. So Slick did what rich Westerners sometimes do when they want something badly enough. He conspired to steal it. Not the whole hand. That would be too obvious. Just a piece. A finger. Enough for analysis. He recruited a young adventurer named Peter Byrne to do the extraction. Byrne, with the help of a local contact, entered the monastery under the guise of a devotee. He examined the hand. He photographed it. And then, in a move that feels ripped from a heist film, he made a swap. Byrne had brought with him a human finger bone, a piece of medical cadaver he'd acquired beforehand. In the dim light of the shrine, he carefully removed one of the Yeti hand's fingers and replaced it with the human substitute. The monks, if they noticed, said nothing. The relic remained in the shrine. And Byrne slipped out of Nepal with the severed digit wrapped in cloth. Now here's where it gets cinematic. To get the finger out of the country without suspicion, Byrne needed a courier who wouldn't be searched. Someone famous. Someone beyond suspicion. He approached actor James Stewart. Yes, that James Stewart, the Hollywood icon, who was visiting Nepal at the time. Stewart, either charmed by the adventure or convinced by Slick's enthusiasm, agreed. He smuggled the Yeti finger out of Nepal in his wife's lingerie bag. The finger made it to London. It was examined by a primatologist. Initial analysis was ambiguous. The bone structure was unusual. The tissue degraded. Without modern DNA technology, the results were inconclusive. Slick died a few years later. The finger disappeared into private collections. The story faded into cryptozoology lore. Until 2011, a team from the Edinburgh Zoo and a genetics lab tracked down the finger. They extracted mitochondrial DNA, and the results were unequivocal. The finger was human. Entirely, unmistakably human. The coarse black hair was found to be a mix of animal fibers, likely goat, woven into the artifact for effect. The mummified hand wasn't a relic of a cryptid. It was a religious object, likely constructed centuries ago from human remains and animal parts as a symbolic representation of a spiritual entity. The monks had never lied. They had always said it was sacred, that it represented something beyond the physical. Western collectors had imposed their own interpretation, that it was a biological specimen. And in doing so, they'd turned a spiritual artifact into a trophy, a mystery into a theft. The irony is sharp. The great piece of evidence was never evidence at all. It was a devotional object, misunderstood and violated by the very people who claimed to seek truth. But the most heartbreaking case isn't about a finger. It's about a woman. Her name, or the name given to her, was Zana. And she was not a Yeti. She was a human being, brutally dehumanized by the people who captured her. The story begins in the 1850s, in the Caucasus Mountains of what is now Abkhazia. Local reports describe a wild woman captured in the forest. She was said to be incredibly strong, covered in dark hair, unable to speak and resistant to cold. She was exhibited, sold, and eventually tamed by a local nobleman who kept her as a curiosity and a servant. She lived in a structure on his estate. She was given menial tasks, and she was repeatedly raped. Zana gave birth to multiple children. Some died in infancy. She reportedly tried to wash them in freezing water, not understanding how to care for them. Others survived and were raised by villagers. These children and their descendants were noted for unusual physical features. Dark skin, robust builds, pronounced brow ridges. Locals whispered that they carried the blood of the wild woman, that Zana was proof of something ancient, something pre-human lingering in the mountains. For over a century, Zana's story was cited in cryptozoology circles as possible evidence of a surviving Neanderthal population or of a relict hominid species. Soviet researchers even exhumed the skull of one of her sons in the 1970s, noting its unusual morphology. In 2013, geneticist Brian Sykes obtained DNA samples from Zana's descendant. The results were published, and they revealed the truth. Zana was 100% Homo sapiens, but her genetic markers indicated she was of sub-Saharan African origin. Specifically, her lineage traced back to populations in East Africa. She was not a relic. She was not a hybrid. She was a black woman, likely brought to the Caucasus through the slave trade, and either abandoned or escaped into the wilderness. Think about that. A woman, trafficked, enslaved, alone in a foreign land, was hunted, captured, and treated as an animal. Her inability to speak the local language was interpreted as subhuman. Her unfamiliar features were read as monstrous. Her strength and resilience, traits that had helped her survive, were framed as evidence of primitiveness. She was raped. Her children were taken. And for more than 100 years, even after her death, she was used as proof of a myth. The monster was never Zana. The monster was the society that looked at a suffering woman and saw a specimen. Now let's cross the ocean. To Northern California. To October 20th, 1967. Two men, Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin, ride horses into Bluff Creek, a remote area in the Six Rivers National Forest. They're filming a documentary about Bigfoot, the American cousin of the Yeti. Just after 1 p.m., their horses spook. Patterson's mount rears. He falls, scrambles to his feet, and grabs his handheld 16mm camera. And then he sees it. A massive figure walking upright along the creek bed. Covered in dark brown fur. Broad shoulders. Long arms. A distinctly non-human gait. Patterson runs toward it, filming as he goes. The creature turns, glances at him. Just for a second, then continues walking into the forest. The entire encounter lasts less than a minute. Patterson captures 59 seconds of footage. That footage, grainy, shaky, but undeniably compelling, becomes the most famous piece of cryptid evidence in history. Frame 352, showing the creature mid-stride, turning to look at the camera, becomes iconic. You've seen it. The heavy brow. The pendulous breasts suggesting a female. The fluid, powerful stride. For decades, it's analyzed by everyone from film experts to primatologists to biomechanics specialists. And for decades, the debate rages. Hoax or real? Here's what made it so convincing. The movement. In 1967, Hollywood's best creature suits were stiff, clumsy. The actors inside them walked like men in costumes. But the figure in the Patterson-Gimlin film moves differently. The arm swing is exaggerated but natural. The leg extension, the hip rotation, the way the creature's weight shifts, it doesn't look like a man trying to walk like an ape. It looks like something genuinely non-human. Skeptics point out that Patterson had a financial motive. He was trying to sell a documentary. That he'd been obsessed with Bigfoot for years, that the timing was too convenient, that no physical evidence was recovered from the site beyond ambiguous footprint. Believers counter with expert testimony. A few primatologists go on record saying the proportions are wrong for a human in a suit. Some biomechanics analysts claim the stride length and joint angles are inconsistent with Homo sapiens anatomy. The stalemate lasts until 2002. That's when a man named Bob Hieronymus comes forward. Hieronymus, an acquaintance of Patterson's, claims he was the one in the suit. He describes how Patterson approached him, offered him a small payment, and provided a costume made of fur, foam, and football shoulder pads. Hieronymus says he walked along the creek while Patterson filmed, then left. He thought it was a harmless prank. He didn't realize it would become legend. Patterson had died in 1972. He couldn't confirm or deny. Gimlin, the other witness, maintained until his death that what they saw was real. But Hieronymus's account includes details, like the specific location where the costume was stored. That check out. Modern analysis seals it. Image stabilization software, unavailable in the 1960s, is applied to the footage. Frame-by-frame breakdowns reveal subtle stitching lines along the creature's legs and torso. The muscle movements, once thought too complex for a suit, are shown to be consistent with foam padding shifting under fabric. The breasts are asymmetrical, likely improvised padding. The Patterson-Gimlin film, the gold standard of cryptid evidence, was a hoax. A good one, a convincing one, but a hoax. And yet, even knowing that, the footage retains its power. Because it showed us what we wanted to see. But here's the twist. While the Yeti and Bigfoot are myths, there was a giant, ape-like creature that walked the earth. It was real. It was enormous. And it's extinct. Meet Gigantopithecus blacki. This primate, which lived in Southeast Asia until roughly 300,000 years ago, stood up to 10 feet tall and weighed over 1,200 pounds. It was the largest primate that ever existed. Fossils, mostly massive molars and jaw fragments, have been found in caves in China and Vietnam. Based on dental analysis, scientists believe Gigantopithecus was a vegetarian, spending its days chewing bamboo in subtropical forests. It was, in many ways, the real-life version of what cryptozoologists dream about. A towering, bipedal or semi-bipedal ape that dwarfed modern humans. But here's the problem. Gigantopithecus went extinct hundreds of thousands of years ago. And it didn't live in the Himalayas. It lived in warm, lowland forests. The idea that a population could have survived, migrated to the coldest, highest mountains on Earth, and adapted to an environment completely unsuited to their biology is not just unlikely, it's biologically absurd. Large primates need enormous amounts of food. Gigantopithecus would have required constant foraging to sustain its body mass. The Himalayas and the Pamir Mountains offer almost nothing. The growing season is brief. Vegetation is sparse. There are no bamboo forests at 15,000 feet. A creature that size would starve in week. Then there's the cold. Primates don't do well in extreme cold. Even with thick fur, a body that large would lose heat rapidly in sub-zero temperatures. Hibernation isn't an option. Primates don't hibernate. Migration to lower altitudes would make the creature visible, documented, and known. And then there's the population question. To maintain genetic diversity and avoid inbreeding, you'd need a breeding population of at least several hundred individuals. Hundreds of 10-foot-tall apes roaming the Himalayas, leaving tracks, leaving dung, leaving bodies when they die. In the age of satellite imagery, motion sensor cameras, and DNA analysis, that population would have been found. Gigantopithecus was real. But it's not the Yeti. The Yeti is what we projected onto the mountains when we didn't know what else could explain the stories. Which brings us to 2014. Oxford University, a laboratory, and the final test. Geneticist Brian Sykes, the same researcher who analyzed Zana's descendants, launches the most comprehensive scientific examination of Yeti evidence ever conducted. He puts out a global call. Anyone with a supposed Yeti artifact, hair, skin, bone, can submit it for DNA testing. No cost. No judgment. Just science. The response is overwhelming. Samples pour in from Nepal, Bhutan, India, Russia, North America. 30 samples in total, representing decades of collected evidence. Each one comes with a story, a sighting, a legend, a promise that this, finally, is the proof. Sykes's team extracts DNA from each sample. They sequence it. They compare it against genetic databases of known species. The results are published in the Proceedings of the Royal Society B. Horsehair, cow hair, black bear, brown bear, human hair, goat, wolf, tapir, sheep, raccoon, even synthetic fibers, nylon and polyester, passed off as biological material. Not a single sample comes from an unknown primate. Not one. The Yeti scalp from a Nepalese monastery? Sero, a goat-like animal. The Bigfoot hair from California? Fiber from a synthetic carpet. The almasty skin from Russia? Bovine leather. For the believers, it's devastating. Decades of hope, of expeditions, of cherished relics, reduced to livestock and fabric. But then, buried in the data, there's something strange. 2 samples, one from Ladakh, India, and one from Bhutan, don't match any known species cleanly. The DNA is ursine, bear. But the sequences are unusual. Mitochondrial analysis reveals a close match to an ancient polar bear jawbone found in Svalbard, Norway. A polar bear that lived 40,000 years ago. The implication: there may be a rare, previously unrecognized subspecies of bear in the Himalayas. A hybrid, perhaps, carrying genetic material from an ancient polar bear ancestor. These bears, if they exist, would be exceptionally rare. They might have unusual fur coloration, lighter or reddish, that doesn't match the typical brown or black Himalayan bears. They might behave differently, venture into higher altitudes, or display aggressive territorial behavior that seems unnatural to locals. In other words, the Yeti might be a bear. A very rare, very unusual bear. But a bear nonetheless. This explanation fit. Bears can walk upright for short distances. They leave tracks that, in snow, can appear elongated and vaguely humanoid. They're powerful, dangerous, and avoid human contact. They smell pungent. They're most active at dawn and dusk. And in poor lighting, at a distance, a bear standing on its hind legs can look disturbingly human. If you encounter one in the mountains, exhausted and oxygen-deprived, your brain, already primed by local stories, will do the rest. So here we are. The Soviet Union spent years chasing a propaganda win that never materialized. Wealthy Westerners stole sacred relics from monks, only to find medical prop. A trafficked woman was paraded as evidence of a missing link. Hollywood's greatest cryptid footage was a man in a suit. And the most rigorous scientific test ever conducted found livestock, carpet fibers, and maybe, just maybe, a rare bear. The Yeti as imagined does not exist. Never did. But something haunts those mountains. Not a creature. A presence. The feeling of something watching from the ridgeline. The stories passed down through generations, each one adding a new detail, a new sighting, a new reason to stay close to the fire. The Yeti is a mirror. It reflects our need for mystery in a world increasingly stripped of it. It reflects our fear of the wild, the untamed, the unknowable. It reflects our arrogance. The assumption that if something looks different, behaves differently, it must be less than human. Zana's tragedy proves that. We saw a woman and called her a monster because she didn't fit our categories. And now, in 2026, the Yeti is fading. Not because we killed it, because we've killed the ambiguity it lived in. Every valley has been mapped. Every peak has been photographed from orbit. Every claimed sighting is uploaded to the internet within hours, scrutinized, debunked, or explained. The Yeti can't survive in 4K. Can't survive GPS tracking and genetic sequencing and thermal imaging drone. The world is too bright now. Too documented. And monsters, it turns out, need shadows to exist. But before you feel too smug, remember this. The bears are still there. The rare, aggressive, genetically anomalous bears that might carry the echo of an ice age in their DNA. They're still roaming those high passes. Still leaving tracks. Still appearing, for just a moment, on the edge of perception before vanishing into the snow. And if you find yourself alone in those mountains, at altitude, in the cold, with your oxygen running low and the wind howling down the glacier, and you see something moving in the distance, something that doesn't walk quite right, that doesn't belong, you won't be thinking about DNA tests. You won't be thinking about pareidolia. You'll be thinking about the stories. And you'll run.